Candyman is a supernatural slasher flick directed by Bernard Rose. Helen is a university professor writing a thesis on urban legends. She decides to investigate a series of murders occurring in the projects of Chicago, where it is thought that Candyman is killing his victims. Howdy folks, welcome back to Garage Slasher-thon, where every day, for the month of October, we revisit a slasher movie. I'm running out of ways to do this. Today we're talking about the one and only Candyman, and if I do say so myself, I think this may be my favorite slasher movie, especially upon rewatch. I don't think I've watched this movie since I was like in my teens or maybe in my early 20s, and it's one of those movies that gets better the more you watch it. I watched it the first time, I was like, wow, this is good, it's fun, yeah, whatever. But upon rewatch, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is definitely top echelon of slasher movies out there. It's such a brilliantly made movie. Disclaimer, I've never seen any of the sequels. I don't really intend on watching any of the sequels, although they do have Tony Todd, who I really like in this movie. I also didn't watch the soft reboot that came out in, I think, 2021 or 2020. One funny thing is I have this friend, and she's black. I have a black friend, and she found out that they were doing a Candyman remake. And what was funny is that she didn't know that it was a remake. She thought it was like an original movie. And she was saying like, oh guys, this is the first time there's a black slasher out there. This is a really important movie for my community. And it tackles themes like gentrification. This is really important. This is like a step forward for my community. And I was just like, I don't want to be the one to burst her bubble. I'll just let her have it. I just kind of sat there like, yeah, there's never been one in the 90s, specifically 1992. Based on the short story by Clive Barker. The short story that was written by Clive Barker was the story of Bloody Mary, basically. And it kind of had the same message of social classes not seeing eye to eye. But his took place in the UK, being a British man, and it was kind of more of, like I said, that Bloody Mary kind of thing. But when they decided to remake the movie and bring it to America, they decided to, instead of have it be in bourgeois English culture, instead have it take place in Chicago, where it's the wealthy in Chicago and the people living on the outskirts of Chicago. Clive Barker, for those of you who don't know, also is responsible for movies like Hellraiser and a bunch of other movies. He's mostly known as an author and a playwright, but he does direct from time to time. Firstly, what I like about this movie is I think when it comes to supernatural horror movies, what really works is when the editing makes it seamless between the dream world and reality. It's something that I commended Nightmare on Elm Street with. It's a really cool thing to have in a horror movie when you don't know what is reality and what is fake, and it really adds to the feeling of dread. And I think that's also present in this movie, and it works on the same level as Nightmare on Elm Street. You can see that the director really borrowed a lot from the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. That said, it's not derivative in any way. It's really got an attitude of its own. The tone of this movie is really different from those Nightmare on Elm Street movies. The Nightmare on Elm Streets feel like the more traditional slasher formula. It feels like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Halloween. This kind of feels different. It kind of has that kind of storybook, fairy tale kind of feel. Upon rewatching it, it really reminded me of what Guillermo del Toro is really good at. And it's telling fairy tales, but in a real setting and for adults, not for children. But just the structure and feel of it just feels like that kind of cinematic fairy tale. And a lot of that, too, I attribute to Philip Glass's score, which Philip Glass is a really renowned composer. He's known for doing the music for movies like Truman Show, but his career stands on its own besides composing for films. And his score in this is so fucking beautiful, and it really helps you get this kind of fairy tale, ballet, operatic kind of feel. So when those fairy tale elements kind of blend with the real world setting, it really does like invoke emotions. The one scene I really liked upon rewatch was the scene where the girl is first encountered with the real Candyman, and then she wakes up and she's just in the slums that she was previously investigating.
I am the writing on the wall, the whisper in the classroom. Without these things, I am nothing. So now I must shed innocent blood. Come with me.
And she just wakes up and there's a dead dog and she doesn't know what happens. Neither does the audience. The audience doesn't know if she's responsible for the murders or if it was Candyman. We don't know if Candyman is just in her mind or if it's a real person. But the one thing that really like irked me, the one thing that really got under my skin is the character who has a baby and all of a sudden her baby disappeared. And the absolute mania that this actress displays, it's probably the best performance of the movie in my opinion. And she has such a small role, but it's like, holy shit. You can tell this character is absolutely losing her fucking mind over the fact that her baby disappeared. And they even set up earlier in the film that this girl is like all about her kid. Like she's like working her ass off just to support this kid. And once that kid disappears and you just feel that fucking emotion that the actress displays, is like, oh, it really like gets under your skin. So yeah, it's like it has like this real world vibe despite kind of feeling like Phantom of the Opera or a fairy tale. And one thing that really adds to that too is Tony Todd's performance as Candyman, because usually slashers, they're very mute, they don't really say much, they're sometimes a little snarky like Freddy Krueger or Chucky, but this guy really does like his own version of a slasher, and he looked at Phantom of the Opera for inspiration for this role, which doesn't surprise me at all. The whole story kind of feels like Phantom of the Opera, this guy who's a monster who finds the one he loves. Anyway, so yeah, it does have that feel, and the way he performs this role is super operatic. His voice has like this beautiful deep rumble to it, and every time he delivers a line of dialogue, it almost feels stage-like, which would be corny in any other context, but just fits like a glove in this movie.
We had a deal.
Surrender to me now, and he shall be unharmed. We have a bargain.
And I'm afraid.
Do you fear the pain, or what is beyond?
Both.
The pain, I can assure you, will be exquisite.
The guy put himself through the ringer as well. Apparently he was paid per bee sting because he had to deal with a lot of bees, obviously. And he got stung 27 times and he got paid $1,000 per sting. So yeah, everything about it. The music by Philip Glass, the performance by Tony Todd, the story itself by Clive Barker. It's just a beautiful mix of everything all in one pot. But also, it goes beyond just being a good slasher movie. It just becomes a really good movie, a really good horror movie. And one thing that horror movies are especially good at is doing social commentary. And this has a lot of good social commentary in it. It's a movie about race relations in America, but it doesn't feel cringy at all. Whereas, from what I hear, the new movie tends to be a little bit on the nose with that kind of thing. This movie kind of has like a message from what I interpret anyway. Many people might interpret stuff differently about the disconnect between white academia and black people. How white academia has this history of taking advantage of black people, especially white medicine, testing on black people, running tests on black people, running studies on black people, and meanwhile kind of dismissing their problems in the meantime. That is until Helen, our protagonist, is dealing with a problem that is a problem in the black community of Chicago, and she all of a sudden is being dismissed by people around her. She's all of a sudden subject to what the black community is going through. And the whole movie is this character kind of being gaslit, kind of being brushed off, kind of being, oh, she's just crazy, she's a criminal who just went on a crazy streak and on a killing spree. Which is interesting because earlier on in the movie, when she first encounters the fake Candyman, she says to her friend, why is it like black people, they're like dismissed in a case like this, but when it's a white woman, all of a sudden it's a huge news story, you know? And so it deals with a lot of those kinds of themes. They're in the background, and because of that, you're allowed to kind of come up with your own interpretation, which is what makes the movie so amazing. And the thought of taking this Bloody Mary story that takes place in high-class England and bringing it into America, it really adds a certain grit to the movie. They also talk about stuff that wasn't really talked about at the time, which is stuff like gentrification. The main character lives in an apartment that's very similar to the apartments in the ghetto, but hers is worth a lot more than the ones in the ghetto, and why is that? There was this really good documentary that came out on Shudder a few years ago called Horror Noir, which explored black people in horror movies and how they are portrayed. And it's a really well-made documentary. I recommend it a lot. And one thing I do like about it is they show different perspectives. Like, different people sometimes have conflicting perspectives on something. And one of those movies with conflicting perspectives is the original Candyman. There's people like Jordan Peele in the documentary who think, wow, Candyman was really unique for its time because there just weren't any black slashers. And after watching several slasher movies for this marathon, I can agree with what he's saying. This is the first movie I review with a black slasher. And it kind of shows like another problem that goes on in Hollywood is that we want to have representation, but we also don't want to make minorities look bad. So you'll rarely see like a minority being portrayed as a bad guy, which is a problem that Camille Nanjiani recently complained about. But other people were critical of Candyman when it came out, saying it has like the King Kong complex, which for those of you who don't know, King Kong is kind of just like a movie where it's like the oogie boogie black guy. And that could be the same for Candyman, where it's like the bad guy is black, he's like a boogeyman, and it's supposed to get under white people's skin. And I don't really agree with that assessment, just because Tony Todd's performance is very charismatic, first of all. There's kind of like some kind of thing that draws you to this character. He just gets you in a trance, and he's also a sympathetic bad guy. That would be the case if Candyman himself was just a boring, two-dimensional bad guy who's just going on a killing spree because black people like killing white people or some shit like that. That's not what this movie is doing. It's really making a sympathetic slasher, which is also another thing that we don't really see in these slasher movies up until this point, where the slasher is always some big reveal, but you never really feel sympathy for the slasher. And this is the first movie to do it effectively, in my opinion. So yeah, I kind of like the messages that this movie brings up about race relations. I like everything on a technical level. The cinematography is beautiful. The gore effects are really unnerving. It's like, it's not... And there's not much on-screen violence, but when they use it sparingly, it's very effective. So the direction is good, the acting is good, especially from Tony Todd himself. Everything about this is good, and when you have a good movie, all of a sudden you start peeling back the layers, and the movie that's underneath the surface is very intelligent as well. I think Candyman is going to be the best movie I talk about in this marathon by far. It goes above and beyond the genre. It goes above and beyond just being a slasher movie, and it just is a good movie. One little thing before I hit the hay here, but one thing I found interesting is in the first act of the movie, you kind of see these two white people doing the Candyman urban legend, and one of them is Sam Raimi's brother. I noticed things like this. And then, apparently, I did some research. The director of this movie, Bernard Rose, was an extra on Army of Darkness. There we go. It all comes full circle. Guys, is Candyman the best slasher movie ever made? Comment below, let me know, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Take care.
Candyman.
You don't have to believe. Just beware.